having many different cameras, some of them have RF mounts, some of them only have EF mounts. I didn't really get into the RF lens line yet, and all of my lenses are still EF mounted. So you obviously need an adapter to go from the RF mount to the EF mount if you still want to use your EF glass on all of your Canon cameras. Especially when it comes to the RF to EF adapters by Canon itself, they are really hard to come by sometimes because they are in popular demand. So you can reach out to third-party distributors like Meike, for example, and check out their line of RF to EF adapters. And that's what we're going to do today, because we tested the regular adapter, the adapter with the control ring, and for me, most importantly, the one with the drop-in VND filters, because I thought this could be a great addition for my Canon R5C. My name is Damien Cooper, and welcome to Meike Pixels. First of all, let's start with a regular RF to EF adapter, and there's nothing really special about this one, but it is a lot cheaper than the Canon equivalent, and I have both so I could compare them to one another. And this one comes with all the electronic pins that the original Canon one has as well, so you can use autofocus with it. You can also have all your EXIF data transmitted to your camera from your lens, so it does behave just exactly like the original Canon one. When it comes to the build quality, I couldn't really tell a big difference. If I had to nitpick and say that one is better than the other, then I would probably pick the Canon one, but considering the huge difference in price, I would always go for the Meike one, because again, the build quality is really solid. We also tested these in stills mode as well as in video mode with Sigma lenses as well as with the original Canon ones, and again, I couldn't tell a difference, neither in autofocus, snappiness, or any other behavior. Next up, there's the RF to EF adapter with the controlling, and that is pretty cool because I've been using this on my R5 when it first came out, and I think that this control ring is pretty cool, and I used it to map my ISO function to it, and that becomes really helpful when you need to switch ISO a lot when you're shooting sports indoor, for example. Again, I would say that the build quality is pretty much on par with the Canon one. There's a little difference though, and that is in the sound it makes when you actually use the control ring. So here's the difference. This is the Meike one. And now, by comparison, here is the Canon one. Here you can tell that the Canon one is a lot quieter, and that can be a good thing, especially when you want to use it in video mode and continuously shooting and then change some settings. But it could also be a benefit if you hear this a little bit louder, so you don't really make any mistakes when changing your ISO, for example, on accident. Since I really wouldn't use this while shooting video anyway, I think that might actually be a benefit, because sometimes it does happen that you change your ISO values or whatever you mapped it to on accident, and if it's a little bit louder, you might be more aware of it and then not make any mistakes while shooting. Another cool thing about the Meike one that the Canon one doesn't have is a USB-C port, so you could actually update the firmware in the future when they come out with a new camera, or if you want to change something, or if that doesn't behave the way you want it to and they release new lenses with image stabilizations, you do have the option to do a firmware update on this one to be better compatible with future lenses. Another thing I really do like about this is the red ring finish, because it complements the overall Canon line, especially the L lenses, and that is also something that distinguishes it from the Canon equivalent. And this one comes in at about $110, so again, I think that's actually a steal. If I have to pick one thing that I don't really 100% like on that one, is that you can't really see the marking to line it up with your body. So here is the Meike one, and you can see that there is a marking, but it's hardly visible at all. So if you're out on the field and you need to quickly change lenses because you're switching from an RF lens to an EF lens, it's really hard to find that marking. Same goes for if you want to attach the lens cap again. Whereas on the Canon one, you do have a red marking that is way easier to find. But that is obviously just a minor thing, and if you're anything like me and you only have EF lenses, then this one stays on your camera at all times anyway. So now let's talk about the one that I'm most excited about, and that is the RF to EF adapter with a drop-in VND filter. Since the R5C doesn't have internal VND filters unlike my C70 or the C300 Mark III, we need to find a solution for this. And I think that this is a great solution, so we went out and tested it. And I was actually surprised about how good it actually was. The adapter itself looks pretty much like all the other ones, with the exception that you can drop in a variable VND filter here on the side. And if you don't want to use the VND filter anymore, you can also use this slot slot to drop in a clear filter so that you can use the adapter the same way, or you could also purchase some mist filters or other filters to use along with this one if you don't want to use the ND filter at all. Speaking of clear filters, this is a huge advantage over the Canon one because this one actually does come with a clear filter, unlike its Canon counterpart. And it also comes with this little box, so you can protect either the ND filter or the clear filter while you're not using it. The variable ND filter itself goes all the way from 1.5 to 9 stops, and that is pretty cool because a lot of other ND filters only go from 2 to 5 stops, so having a little bit less on the 1.5 side and a huge 9 ND stops on the other side is actually pretty cool if you want to have one filter for everything. And we went out the other day shooting in bright sunlight, and I was actually surprised of how strong that ND filter is, because even shooting wide open with a base ISO of 800 at an aperture of 1.4, we actually had no problems, and we could stop it down so much that it was pitch black afterwards. So that is something that I was really surprised about, and that is pretty cool for run and gun work. The ring to change the intensity of the ND filter is quite small and a little bit fiddly. I also found that it works kind of well in the 1.5 to, let's say, 4 to 5 stops, but if you go higher than 5 stops, then just slightly touching it goes a very long way. So that makes it really hard if you're on set and you're shooting and you just want to gradually change the exposure without it being noticeable while shooting. That becomes quite hard because, again, it's really sensitive, but that makes sense because the ND filter is very small, so every change shows up drastically, especially because it's 1.5 to 9 stops. So making subtle changes with this ND filter, especially when you're in the higher ND range, then it becomes quite fiddly. But again, I'm used to having internal ND filters, so this is definitely a step up anyway. I was also really surprised about the overall quality of the ND filter because I was expecting a little bit of a green shift that most of VNDs have, and that one hardly has any green shift, if any at all. So that was really pleasing, and the image looked really great afterwards. This is one thing when you turn it all the way to 9 stops of ND and then you turn the wheel even further, then it becomes less intense, and I think that's just the variable ND filters overturning, but it is just something you have to be aware of. And again, you have to be really careful when making subtle changes with this tiny wheel anyway. Another thing I really would like to have is the stops you actually make on it. Here it only shows mini, mid and maximum, and that really doesn't say anything. I would like to have some markings on it, how many stops of ND we actually have currently, but again, it's so small you wouldn't be able to see it anyway probably. Another thing you need to be aware of is that there is a strong polarization going on with this filter as well. So if you film a window or a computer screen, then you need to be aware of this because it does drastically change. That's a thing that's going on with almost all of VND filters. There is some that have this a little bit stronger, and I think the smaller the variable ND filter is, the stronger it becomes, because on my Tilta VND, for example, it's not as strong, but this is something you need to be aware of. And now the absolute best part about this drop-in VND filter, it's only 130 bucks. It's 130 bucks for the filter, including the variable ND filter and the clear filter, and that is not even a quarter of the price of the Canon equivalent. And I haven't used the one from Canon itself, but I've watched a lot of reviews online, and I think that the quality of the variable ND filter of the one from Meike is actually a little bit better than the one on the Canon. And again, we used it all day shooting outside, and I really did like it. Obviously, the one downside is that you can't use RF lenses with it, but if you're only using EF lenses, then I think for video shooters, this is an amazing tool. So if you want to check them out, there's links in the description below. And overall, I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, then please give it a thumbs up because it really helps the channel grow. Subscribe for more, and I hope to see you on the next one.